Hi everyone, Andrew from Kensington Wine Market here to tell you about our third store exclusive cask of Amrut. It is a 2013 port cask of Amrut, bottled a little over 9 years of age, exclusively for your friends at Kensington Wine Market. And I do want to point something out because this is a bit of a curiosity here. Bottled at 60%. This is not cask strength. This is actually diluted to 60%. And there's some good reasons for that. One, the climate in India is such that the whiskey gains in strength over time. It's hot, it's dry at times of the year. And one of the catches there is that the export tax in India, if you bottle above 60% alcohol, is enormous. So when you see Amrut bottlings at 60%, they were probably at cask strength, but they've been diluted down to a level that saves an enormous amount of export tax. And on the Canadian side as well, whiskeys bottled above 60% pay a higher tax as well. So ultimately, this is as close to cask strength as you're going to get for a high proof bottling of Amrut like this. But none of us paid as much tax as maybe we might have. And that's a good thing, is it not? So Amrut, what can we tell you about Amrut? Founded in 1947, 1948. The company has been making an Indian style whiskey for, well, think about that now, 80-ish years, 80 something years. What's cool about Amrut is that long before the trend in single malt started, Amrut was producing malt whiskey as well as whiskey from molasses, which I know in most of the world we don't call whiskey, but the vast majority of Indian whiskey, and the Indians are the largest producers and consumers of whiskey in the world, is made from molasses. And what Amrut started doing in the 80s was blending malt whiskey into their molasses spirit to create something they felt was a better whiskey, essentially. Later on down the line, in 2004, they decided to launch Amrut single malt on a global basis. It wasn't initially launched in India for a number of reasons, including that most Indian consumers were not really into that style at that time. It might have been a little bit ahead of the curve. So it wasn't until about 2010 that they actually launched it in the Bangalore area to start with, and then in other parts of India beyond, which is really fascinating because you think, Amrut's had such a good reputation for, the better part of 2 decades now in Canada. I want to say probably maybe 17, 18 years that it's been in the market, and in the UK, in the US, certainly in the UK a little longer. And it's just funny to think that they started exporting rather than producing and selling it for a local market, because that's where the money was and that's where the consumers were to start off with. But eventually the demand was such that they had to bring things back. This is an unpeated Amrut made from 6-row Indian barley. So this is not one of the variants with peated Scottish malt. This is unpeated Indian barley, malted in India. And the other curiosity about this is port cask. In the 150 plus casks that we've bottled for Kensington Wine Market, this is the first one that's ever been a port cask. And many people know that I'm a bit of a port cask skeptic. I find that they're very hit or miss in terms of how well the whiskey matures in them. And I think that has something to do with the fact that port casks, especially if we're talking tawnies, like the old aged ports, they're being used not because they impart flavor, but because the wood is considered dead. It's been so used. There's no flavor congeners left in it. It's essentially a vessel for maturation and oxidation. And I know that some of the best port houses don't replace entire casks. They'll replace a stave if a stave is starting to leak. And the wood in some of these casks is well over 100 years old. With young tawnies and rubies, that might be slightly different. I don't have as much knowledge about those type of casks, but I think that inconsistency comes from the fact that the wood maybe doesn't have as much to give as an ex-bourbon barrel or a sherry seasoned cask. But for long-term maturation in a good port cask, there are good bottlings out there. I remember some Bowmores from I want to say the late 80s or early 90s that were quite good. There have been other exceptions to this, but for me and some of the members of my team, port casks they're kind of scary. Until we try them, we're not really sure what we're going to get. Anyway, enough about that. This is our third cask of Amrut. At the time we selected this, and we had the pleasure of selecting this with our friend Ashok when he was through the market last fall 2022. He was astounded at the fact that that Amrut we were selecting was our 145th store pick. And so he noted that on the bottle. 145th exclusive cask, exclusively bottled for Kensington Wine Market. Unfortunately, it takes a little while to get things out of India. And in fact, this is the fastest cask to arrive at our door from Amrut. The two prior casks took a year and a half at least. One of them, I think, was close to 20 months. This one was bottled in December of 2022. So the fact it arrived in September, 9 months, that's pretty good. But part of that is just the complexity of exporting from India. The paperwork involved for Indian customs is legendary from what I've heard, and all of that plays into this. So what can I tell you about this particular whiskey? Glad you asked. Bottled from a port pipe, cask number 4660, bottled at 9 years plus, about 9 years and 3 months of age. And on that note, it's kind of worth reflecting on that for a second. In India, the whiskey matures much more quickly. The evaporation rate is enormous, 10+% per year. So you think about leaving something for 9 years in a cask. At the end of those 9 years, most of what you put in there has evaporated away, just through that insane angel share that climate has. So we have not seen a lot of older Amrut bottlings, certainly not 9 and 10-year-old bottlings. The only ones in that range that we've really seen are the Greedy Angels releases. And we all know how rare those are and the prices they command. So for Ashok to give us one of these old casks is really, truly incredible. And don't get hung up on that 9 years thinking, oh, this is young. You know, there's an effective age. What's the effective age of this? It's certainly a lot more than 9-10 years of age. The effective age is in the 18 to 25 year range based on the speed at which whiskey matures in these hotter climates. Let's give this a nose, shall we? On the nose, I mean, I think what I really love about this is that it doesn't scream port cask right off the bat. It just screams good wood. It's kind of old school, chocolatey, dried fruits, spices, tobacco, leather. You could be confused for thinking that this could potentially be a sherry cask just based on the nose, a really soft old sherry cask. The more you get into it though, the more that those like tawny fruits, tawny port style fruits start to creep out, that chocolate creeps out, and then there's a mustiness to this too. And that mustiness is something I find in a lot of port cask matured whiskeys. I also find that same sort of earthy, dunnage, oaky, musty note in a lot of old tawny ports too. It's just, that's the terroir, that's the cellar experience, that's the environment that it's maturing in, adding that character. Well, let's give it a taste. Oh man, rich, jammy. There's a big backbone of spice in there too. Earthy and nutty. Notes of espresso, coffee bean. Lots going on there. It's big. It's 60%. You know, you're thinking it's going to have some sort of weight to it. And it's a little bit warming. It's not sharp. It's not rough. Very, very approachable at the drinking strength, or at the bottling strength. On the palate, more dried fruits, clove, fennel, anise, maybe like that candied fennel that you get in some Indian restaurants. Nice spicy notes, but tons of chocolate. There's so much chocolate here. Milk chocolate, dark chocolate, chocolate desserts like that flourless dark chocolate cake. Just a ton going on here. Even in the finish, you're getting like cocoa nibs, like raw cocoa nibs coming through. The finish is soft, it's smooth, it's a little bit on the sweet side. You do get that port character coming through a little bit in the whiskey, but in the best possible way. leather, tobacco, and again, those big spices coming in with the coffee beans and the chocolate there on the palate. The finish, it's long, it's lovely. This is a superb bottling vendor. It's a superb port cask as well too. And I hope you're gonna like it. These are $2.15 exclusively from Kensington Wine Market. Now in terms of how many bottles we've got here, 300 total bottles. So, you know, decent amount, but not a lot. The first roughly 50 of these sold when we launched it. What date was that now? Late September. So, you know, they might last the rest of the year, they might not, but I hope you like our Amrut 2013 port cask. Big thank you to Onyx Beverage, the importers, and to our good friend Ashok at Amrut Distillery for lining up a fabulous third Kensington Wine Market Amrut cask for us. So cheers, everybody.